growth and development. Now, last year, because of the Ukraine conflict, I think the conversations went in the direction of one issue. We would like to see, without disrespecting that particular issue, we would like to see a return to what we believe matters most to the roughly 200 countries of the world. And in that sense, I would say more than getting 22 out of 24. I would take satisfaction in the fact that the finance ministers meeting in Bangalore and Bengaluru and my meeting in Delhi, we were able to get the G20 back on track.
So you're confident that in September when the leaders meet, a bulk of the conversations will be around the issues that you just outlined?
I would say yes, that should be the progression. Every G20, there is a strong element of continuity. And there are some new ideas which come in. My sense is that you would see some ideas come in as well. Probably a bit early, may take a few meetings more for that to move. But I would certainly hope that by September, we would have a G20 leaders meeting which would look at the crucial issues pertaining to global growth and global development.
Sure. So one of the consequences, I guess, because of the war, perhaps it's been accentuated because of the war, is the world is increasingly looking like two blocks. You have the United States and its partners on the one side, and you have Russia and China on the other, most of all because of what happened last week when Xi Jinping went to Moscow. What do you make of that? And how, again, I come back to this, how does a country like India play that? Because we are in neither camp.
I think you are oversimplifying this, deliberately so, I understand.
Journalist occupational hazard.
Yes, absolutely, I get that. I'll tell you why you're oversimplifying it. It's not, Russia and China versus the West in that simplistic a term. After all, the primary partner, economic partner of China is the West, and the primary economic partner of the West is China. So they have an enormous amount of economic interface there. Where Russia is concerned, I would actually go back to my initial point, which is, I think, one of the natural consequences of the Ukraine conflict is that Russia, a Eurasian power which has historically looked much more towards Europe, today finds its relationships with the West very, very difficult. So that Russia is inclined in many ways therefore, to turn much more to the Asian side of Russia. Yeah. So I would predict fairly safely, and I think the numbers this year already bear me out, that you will see an intensification in Russia's relationship with Asia as a whole. Now, you spoke about Russia-China, but I would suggest to you that many other countries in Asia, maybe not economically all of the same size, but there are some fairly consequential economies. We would number one of them. And my expectation is you will see actually Russia also show that much more interest in developing its cooperation with India. Now, if you look at the India-Russia relationship, for the last 70 years, this has been one of the most steady relationships in international relations. That, take all the major players, Russia, China, Russia, West, West China, you've seen enormous volatility in their relationship. Whereas from 1955, which was the year Bulganin and Khrushchev came to India, you've actually had a very, very steady, even after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was a bit of a gap there, but very quickly the relationship came back to where it was. So I do think that, yes, you will see a change in Russia's posture and priorities, but I think for India, this is also in many ways an opportunity to grow its relationship, because our relationship with Russia has been very, the bandwidth is very narrow. It has been mainly defense, nuclear and space. The trade relationship with Russia historically has been not historically, at least in the last 2-3 decades, has been very, very narrow. And you can see that grow.
So, but when now, particularly when European countries say that, before the start of the war, Russia was supplying India less than 1% of your oil requirements, suddenly Russia is your top oil supplier, what do you say to that?
I'd say the market is the market. We all believe in markets, right?
Of course. So let's talk a little bit about domestic politics as well, because as you said some time back, there's a lot of interest outside about domestic politics, and of course in India also there's a lot of interest about what's happening around the world. Your parliamentary colleague, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the Congress party, he made some comments while he was abroad. There was a backlash to those comments. Your party basically wanted him to apologize, and then subsequently now there's a court conviction and he's been disqualified. I want to know your...
Sorry, the two are not related.
The two are not related. Fair enough. I'm just
so that we are clear.
Chronological order of what's happened with Mr. Gandhi over the last couple of weeks. I want, first of all, your reaction to the disqualification and what the opposition is saying, that, look, this sort of proves what we've been saying all along. The Modi government is illiberal. It's an electoral autocracy. Opposition's not being allowed to talk. How would you respond to them?
So let's assume I have a counterpart or a colleague, or I go abroad and somebody asks me what you're asking. How would I put it? I mean, that's essentially what you're asking me. I guess I would say that 4 years ago, Rahul Gandhi was disparaging of a community in a public meeting. This is not me saying it, it's on record. A member of that community took offense and began legal proceedings. Rahul Gandhi had an opportunity of rectifying the situation, of expressing regret. He chose not to do so. The legal proceedings then produced an outcome. The outcome triggered a law which I would remind you Rahul Gandhi himself had in a way supported some years ago. A law that has been applied, I think, to about 10, 12 other elected representatives, including of the ruling party. So my answer to somebody who asked me this would be the law is the law. Unless somebody thinks the law is not the law for them. I mean, that's...
Okay. Has anybody asked you this? Have any foreign diplomats or governments asked you this? But if they do, this would be your answer.
I'm practicing it on you, and if there is a...
Nice to know that you've equated me to a foreign diplomat. But let's, because the reason I ask you this is because there are ramifications of what he's saying and the narrative that the opposition wants to build. You have been vehemently opposing that narrative that's been constructed, some of which has been fed into by some sections of the Western press, that, since 2014, India has become an illiberal country, an electoral autocracy. You don't fear that this actions of the last 10 days or so feed into that narrative?
Look, my sense is those who are feeding that narrative, narrative are people with an agenda. They're not stupid people, okay? So they will misrepresent facts, or they would, twist things, because it's part of developing a narrative. I'll give you some examples. If you look at some of these think tanks and reports which would come out, many of them would suggest to you as though there's a whole problem around Assam, which started with Narendra Modi as Prime Minister. Okay, you and I know it goes back to Indira Gandhi's time. But that's not the way the narrative is now, the sleight of hand which happens. They would say, that a former Chief Justice now entering Parliament is somehow not well reflective of the judiciary. They won't tell you it's happened before, and not yeah. So, the beauty of these narratives is, what you shade, what you suppress, what you sharpen, then you stitch it around. Now, yes, for people who do all of this, they would certainly use it. But to which I would turn around and ask them, saying, so tell me, does that mean this law, after being applied to 10 or 12 other people, should not apply in this case? And in this particular case, this law and this application has a certain past.
Yeah.
So I think we need to recognize today that a lot of what passes off as debate, what is often suggested as an analysis of the state of the Indian polity, is actually politics.
It's not analysis, it's more politics.
It is, absolutely.
So you talked about narratives and you gave the example of Assam. Now, one state where there seems to be this narrative and it directly has a bearing on your ministry and the missions abroad is Punjab and this whole Khalistan sentiment. We've had attacks on our missions in London, San Francisco. Yes, diplomats have been summoned, statements have been read out to them, so on and so forth. What else do you intend to do to send out the message that you're playing with India's national security and territorial integrity, and that's unacceptable?
Look, again, because here again, we mustn't fall for a narrative. We must actually look at what are the facts on the ground. So let's look at the facts on the ground in India and let's look at the facts on the ground abroad. The fact on the ground in India is a bunch of people went by force into a police station to take out somebody, which was in violation of probably multiple provisions of the law. So tell me which country would countenance this? Okay, that's the fact within India. So you don't have to put a movement or an ideology to it. I mean, irrespective of whatever the issue. I mean, which law-abiding society would allow a mob to storm a police station and take somebody out? That is the bottom line situation. Now, if you look what's happening abroad, in the name of free speech and democratic freedoms, of which I'm equally a votary, if you allow people to intrude into diplomatic premises, to attack diplomats, to threaten diplomats, to take down flags, I ask you, suppose the roles were reversed. Suppose one of those countries had this done to one of their missions. What do you think they'd be saying? So I think somewhere it's time that we are clear about who we are and the stand that we take. And if these things happen, there will be consequences.
So when you bring up these conversations with your counterparts, where these missions have been attacked, do they get it? Do they understand the seriousness of what's happening and what it means to India?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I would hope so. I think by and large, you will not disagree. I do communicate fairly clearly.
We'll give you that much.
And I think so do our ambassadors and my colleagues in the foreign ministry. I think we've been very, very straight with the few countries where these incidents have happened. I don't think they have any doubt about where we stand on this matter.
All right. You say so. Ambassadors are very clear where we stand on these issues. One of the incoming ambassadors, a good friend of yours, Mr. Garcetti, in his Senate confirmation hearing, apparently said that human rights was his major in college and he intends that to be very much part of the conversations when he lands in India. और आपने कहा कि उनको प्यार से समझा देंगे. प्यार से समझाएंगे इस मंच को कि क्या बोलेंगे आप उनको?
नहीं, उनको आने दीजिए ना. No, I think he should, it's certain things in our profession are best done between us. So we will leave it at that.
Okay.
But I 100% प्यार से होगा.
प्यार से बुलाएंगे. So let me talking about Pyar Se Samjhayenge, I want to come back to the Rahul Gandhi question because, you've interacted with him in whatever limited fashion because, you briefed the Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs. He's a member. And he had recently said in England, while he was in England, that he drew this analogy between Ukraine and Ukraine and Arunachal. And he also said that I said this to the minister, and the minister said it's a ludicrous idea. Your comments on that, did that happen? Do you?
And the minister said what?
That it was a ludicrous idea.
Ludicrous. Okay.
Ludicrous idea.
Okay.
And also I want your general impressions of him because you've interacted with him, you brief the members.
Look, we are not by etiquette and I guess by rules supposed to discuss in public what happened in a consultative committee meeting. So if he referred to it, in my view, he should not have. I certainly will not talk about what happened in a consultative committee meeting. But let's look at the substance of the issue, because he has said that on public record. Forget about the fact that there was a consultative committee meeting for a moment. What China did in 2020 and what is happening today in Ukraine. Okay. What is today happening in Ukraine, if you follow the two sides, one would say that they are threatened by the expansion of NATO and the character of the regime in Ukraine. And the other one would, the Western countries would say the Russians have ambitions, expansionist designs, whatever it is. What is the analogy between that and India-China? I mean, what happened in the border, which, by the way, is, in my view, completely indefensible. So don't get me wrong there. That has nothing to do, there's no NATO in play here. There's no regime character in play here. So I just don't see the comparison.
So tell me, since you mentioned China, where are we on this, the border confrontation that happened? I mean, I believe out of the 7 odd points, 5, there has been disengagement, 2, there is still no disengagement. Just a broad understanding that, do you believe this has gone beyond the remit of army commanders? This has to be a political sort of dialogue and eventually moving to resolve the situation?
Look, first you have to understand what is the nature of the problem. The nature of the problem is that two militaries who generally were not 24/7 deployed at or on or very close to the LAC have done so to a great degree after May of 2020. Because pre-May of 2020, both militaries were primarily located in the depth areas where they had permanent bases, and then they would patrol out into the LAC. Now, in 2020, the Chinese breached that in violation of the 93-96 agreements, brought forces to the LAC. Obviously, we countered it. They stayed there, we stayed there. So as a result, you have a very, very intricate situation of very multiple close-up deployments, which by common sense sort of military assessments, a very dangerous situation to be. And that danger, of course, was, we had to caution them. And then, of course, Galwan happened, which only was proof that, how volatile the situation could be. Now, in this, we have, I met my counterpart in September 2020. He accepted that this was a dangerous situation. And since then, we've been trying to the close-up deployments, not close-up deployments, the close-up forward deployments. But it can only be done if there is a mutual agreement. Because in the past, there have been occasions when, quite honestly, without revealing revealing confidences. We may have made some such unilateral move, and we found it was not necessarily responded to by the other side. So everything that we have done is on the basis of what we call the principle of mutual and equal security, which means, if we move back here, you will move back there. So now again, some canards have been floated that, buffer zones have been created in our patrolling areas. If I'm not able to patrol somewhere, he's also not able to patrol on that area. So it's, whatever we have been done is mutual, it is negotiated. Now, this is still unfinished work. There are places where we have this forward deployments. We continue to work away at it. I will only remind you when this started in the summer of 2020.
Yeah.
If you took the cumulative analysis of this city, people told me this, we're not going to get a solution. The Chinese are going to do this, there's nothing you can do. I would say, please look at the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
My sense is the military has done what the military should do. The military has deployed. The military deployed in the COVID. The military is deployed round the year. The military is deployed through the winter. The military is deployed at great heights.
Yeah.
And secondly, the military and diplomacy has worked in lockstep. Now, your question, should you not leave it to military commanders? First of all, it has never been left entirely to military commanders. The military commanders and the diplomats work as a team. Now, you cannot, to take away the military commanders is ridiculous, because the military commander is a person who knows the troops, who knows the topography, who actually knows what is mutual and equal security, which by the way means it's not like the distance on the map. There are many other factors which come into being. So I would say actually in the last 3 years, this combo of military diplomacy and diplomacy working in lockstep has made progress. I accept that we have not been able to sort everything out, but I also tell you that I have not, it's not like for me the end of the road. We will keep at it. When I met the new foreign minister, Chingang, in Delhi on the sidelines of G20, it was something that we discussed. So it is work in progress, and I would certainly like to see more progress.
Since you mentioned you met the new Chinese foreign minister, there seems to be a bit of a change in Chinese diplomacy, if you will. You're seeing the moves that they're making vis-a-vis Iran and Saudi Arabia. They've also floated this 12-point peace plan with Ukraine. What do you make of it in general terms? Do you think that China is trying to play a major global role? And do you think that they're trying to sort of fill in a void they believe the US is leaving behind?
Look, no question that if you take any metric in the last 20, 25 years, I would say maybe even last 40 years, in many ways, China has gone up. So have we. Yeah. Okay. Maybe not at the same pace. Frankly, if we had honestly had this government, I know this is a very biased statement, but if we had had a government like this 25, 30 years ago, maybe we would have gone up faster. But at least today, if you look at the progress in the last decade, do also see that just like China's reach and influence and equities grow, ours too are growing. But in this particular case, what you are mentioning, I think you have a very complex regional problem in which obviously China is involved. The parties have found China useful in whatever that they are doing. And that is something which is a fact.
Do we recalibrate? Because we have huge energy requirements from there. We have a huge diaspora there. Is there any ramification for us?
Why do I need to recalibrate? How is this in any way affecting my relationship with Iran and my relationship with the Saudis? Both relationships are doing well. Both relationships in the last 10 years have got much more attention than they got in the previous 20 years. And so I'm doing quite well there. Thank you.
So since you mentioned that, just as China's equity has grown, so has India's, would India want to attempt to try and play peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine?
Look, it's not that simple. I would say it's natural for India, if a situation arises where we can be helpful, of course we would like to be helpful. But, to say we would like to be helpful, to say would you like to play peacemaker, that's like a very high bar that you're setting. I'm not sure the conditions right now, in any case, would even justify such an expectation. But again, look, the messaging which Prime Minister has given both to President Putin and to President Zelensky, I've been with him in most of his conversations, is that, in our view, there should be a return to the negotiation table. If there is anything we can do, let me know. We are willing to do what we can. But we don't want to, force ourselves or insert ourselves in a situation which is not ripe for such a thing.
So since we've come to the almost last 10 minutes of this session, I want to ask a few personal questions. You are now a social media star, right? Do you plan these things? Ki when I go here, I'll give them this bite, ye viral ho jayega. I mean, even when we were outside, people are standing to take selfies with you and so on. How do you see this newfound stardom?
I would say it's, as you can see, even from my hesitation, that I'm not prepared. Okay. Look, mostly it happens in a conversation like you and I are having. It's something you say because somebody has provoked you, or somebody has pressurized you, or somebody has very cleverly, like you, manipulated you. So you end up saying something. But I guess it's the times, isn't it? I mean, this is an era where people would pick up a sentence, a phrase or something and move it beyond. I take it in that spirit.
How do your family members react to this? You're a celebrity now. You're more than just a diplomat or a minister.
I think my family members probably, we are even otherwise a very relatively private family, yeah. And we try to become even more private as a consequence to all of this.
So, tell me, Minister, you travel a lot. Now that COVID is over, you're pretty much traveling 15 days in a month, maybe even more. People are curious, and people have been writing into our social media handles asking, what is your fitness regimen like?
Mix of things. Mostly, I do make an effort to stay fit, because if I don't, I'd be dead. Given the travel and the time zones and the meal schedules you have. So I try to stay fit. I, play 2 racket sports, squash and badminton, when I'm in Delhi. When I'm on travel, I actually started doing yoga about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of helpful. If I can find a gym, I'd go there. But I tell you, it's not just a question of being fit. I have realized that fitness is a kind of a prerequisite for a competitiveness. If you're feeling lousy about yourself that morning, you're not going to be all there. You're not going to give your best performance. You're not going to give that sharp reply or whatever. So if you want to be on that ball, so we have today fitness movements in the country. I'm very, very involved in it. I'm very supportive of it. Fit India, Khelo India, etc. I can actually see it having an impact on society. That if I were to look at the last decade, where in the last decade, I would suggest to all of you, our fitness awareness has grown tremendously in this country. It's grown particularly with young people. And we have today, even if you take a sport, we said, okay, take cricket. But we'd say, whatever you might say, this is the fittest Indian cricket team. And you can see it in other ways. You look at our sports performance. It was boxing last week,
4 goals every one,
or badminton, or even the women's cricket. I don't know if you followed it. And it's a kind of a mindset which comes along with that fitness. So I feel people are more assured, they are more confident. So to me, you know, in politics, we use this phrase of a new India. To me, a new India is a more fit India, but a more competitive India. So it could be sports, it could be, you know, the way you rise to a crisis like we did to COVID. It could be the confidence with which you would say, do something on the tech side, you know, do a 5G stack or a covaxin. It's a package out there. And I need that package for my, you know, for my sharpness.
Because of the demands of the job, sure. Since you mentioned sport, I know you're also a big cricket fanatic. Do you have a favorite cricketer and who?
It's hard to give you a single name. So if you'll permit me multiple choice answers, I would say yes. If I were to pick three people really top of my head, definitely Virender Sehwag.
Okay.
You know, he's attacking, he takes the game to the opposition.
It's a bit like what you do in diplomacy.
I would say Dhoni, no question. But for this reason, you know, he's always strategizing. I mean, even to the last ball, you can see, and that's like how to be cool under pressure. And maybe here, another degree of some self-identification, maybe Jimmy Anderson.
Jimmy Anderson?
For this reason, you know, at that age, I think he's 40, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's 40.
Okay. At 40, to be a fast bowler at that level, that's to me, perseverance, endurance, that's fitness. You know?
Wow.
So I would say attacking, calm, endurance. That would be my slightly longish answer.
Interesting. ACE, attacking, calm, and endurance. I also know that you're a voracious reader. Any book that's had a profound impact on you, either career-wise, diplomacy-wise, or even otherwise, personally?
Well, lot of books, because I do read a lot, but if I were to say, reinterpret your question to say a book which I would have repeatedly read, you know, 25 times, 50 times kind of thing. Probably two. One is Mahabharata. I carry a copy on my travels. I read it often. I have multiple versions. I have a whole bookshelf of variations of it, including some of the multiple volume editions. Maybe Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Those would be the two which I've read most often.
You're a Tolkien fan?
Very much.
Oh, interesting. So what's your favorite character from LOTR?
In Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, in Lord of the Rings.
I would say really probably on balance, and this comes down a bit to the cricket-like thing, probably Legolas.
Oh, nice.
Because he's the calm guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's the guy who keeps, you know, things are falling apart. Somebody has to hold
it together.
Hold it to, and that's maybe it's my profession.
Yeah.
You know.
Music? Are you into music? And the music is in the air these days because of Natu Natu and the Oscar for it. You of course made a famous reference to Tony Blair recently. Gave him a bit of a poke. Is there any favorite album, favorite artist?
No. Look, we were a household. My interest in international relations actually came out of music.
Came through music?
Yeah.
How
because
so?
When I was very young, first my grandparents and then my parents brought international music home. I mean, through records,
nice.
And then encouraged. We used to listen to radio and all that. So for me, when I first thought about the world, I first thought about the world in terms of the music that I heard from the world. To some extent, the books that you got. So it was, I mean, this was a time when there was no TV, remember?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So there was no TV, there was nothing which anybody modern would, anybody today, contemporary, young would identify as a connect with the world.
Yeah.
So it was largely radio, it was books. So for me, my international sense was also music, and even within India, and my parents were deeply interested in music. My mother actually had a degree in music.
Oh, wow.
So So we would have somebody playing MS in one room and Lata Mangeshkar in another, and somebody would be trying to, put a Beethoven on the gramophone on the other side. So that was the house.
Nice. So finally, as we round up, I mean, you've been a diplomat since 1977-78 for the last 40, 45 years now. Surely there must have been a diplomat or multiple diplomats who have impacted you profoundly, your most favorite diplomat, as it were.
That's a question, because, look, I had a mentor, I would say, in the Foreign Service, to whom I actually dedicated my book, who really, I mean, you kind of are an understudy to somebody when you join.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, enormously helpful in shaping my early years. And this was a person called Arvind Dev. So in personal terms, I would say he is someone, a lot of my thinking, my sense of tutelage goes back to him. I had some very, very good bosses, I mean, who had the kind of legends of the Indian Foreign Service. There was a gentleman called Shankar Bajpai, who was our ambassador in Washington, Rasgotra, who was a foreign secretary. So I was Dixit, who was my boss in Colombo. So I had the good fortune to work under some very, really good people who took care to teach you something consciously, So I would say they would have impacted me, but there were a lot of people I would meet, of other ministers or other countries. Yeah. I mean, I'm old enough to have actually sat in a meeting with Andrei Gromyko and, and separately with George Shultz. Oh. So when you actually see somebody like a Gromyko or a Shultz of that era operate, it's
all right. Now, this is my last question. Since you brought up multiple choice questions, I'm going to give you a multiple choice. You can either confirm, deny, or neither confirm nor deny. Is the party prepping you to contest the Lok Sabha election next year?
I have no idea.
That's not part of the options, by the way.
It doesn't follow any of your... but my Rajya Sabha is due this year.
Oh, nice.
So I would suggest watch my Rajya Sabha.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S Jaishankar.
Well, that was a fantastic session. I think Dr. Jaishankar deserves a much rounder applause. And please, can we bring down the house? Wonderful to see so many people at the News18 Rising India. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. And I'm going to request Zaka to present a moment. Yeah, I need to get some feedback from all of you. Did you like the first two sessions? Did you enjoy it? I can't hear him. Yeah, so whoever enjoyed it, please put your hand up, the right side. Thank you so much. Whoever didn't enjoy it, put your left hand up. No, all right, so everybody's got their right hand. Thank you very much. And can you just put it up once again, please, everybody? Well, that's me saying hi to all of you. Thank you very much. And I hope anybody who's just feeling like, yeah, thodi neend aa rahi hai, chai vai pila do. I hope you've woken up again, because we've got a fantastic session, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I'd like to tell you that yes, we're talking policy. Yes, we're talking about how we want to see Bharat in 2047. That is what is the whole idea of trying to say, how is it that we can take through these conversations. But please let us remember that we are going to celebrate our real heroes. There's some phenomenal stories of people, common people on ground, unsung heroes, who we are going to celebrate and who we're going to take inspiration or draw inspiration from. Let's quickly move on. May I now invite a person who needs no introduction, and she's part of this News 18 family, and I'm so proud that she is, the one and only Shireen Bhan.
I have to tell you that this is a very, very nervous situation to be in, because it's a very tough act to follow. But I promise that we are going to have a conversation that is going to be very, very engaging. I have three very provocative speakers who will join us here to talk about an issue that is top of mind and also occupies a big part of India's growth agenda. So without further ado, let's get started. Bill Gates was in India a couple of weeks ago, and this is what he said. No country has built a more comprehensive digital infrastructure than India. We need innovation from the world, but specifically, we need innovation from India. To talk about India's digital ecosystem as well as the engines for growth, joining me now are three very special individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm round of applause as we welcome the Secretary of the Department of Telecommunications, K. Rajaraman. Mr. Rajaraman, can we have you join us here on the Rising India stage? Also with us is Mr. BVR Subramaniam, the new CEO of the Niti Aayog. Mr. Subramaniam, please join us on the Rising India stage. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. And the man who is creating milestones with UPI, the CEO of the National Payments Corporation of India, Dilip Asbe, joins us here at Rising India. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Rajaraman. The middle is fine, sir. The middle seat is fine, and we'll get Dilip right at the end. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us here today. Mr. Rajaraman, let me start by asking you, because the growth of digital India is incumbent on the digital highway and the digital infrastructure, which the Department of Telecommunications that you lead is responsible for. So let me start by asking you about where things currently stand now as far as the National Broadband Mission is concerned, as well as BharatNet. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who may not be aware, BharatNet is essentially the plan to connect India's villages with high-speed broadband connectivity. So I want to start by asking you for an update on where things currently stand. What are the latest milestones on that front?
So, it's a pleasure being here in this very diverse audience. So the task before us is to actually to enable every citizen of this country to access broadband. That is the ultimate goal that the Honorable Prime Minister set for all of us. So this journey of laying out optic fibers to the rural heartlands, I think, is a very onerous task, given that we have very diverse territories which are remote, mountainous, etc. So the target that was before us was nearly 2.5 lakh gram panchayats. Out of that, construction is going on in all the 2.2, and the 1.9 lakh gram panchayats have already been wired up with the optic fiber. So in October, we took the decision of actually commencing the monetization. Because at the end of the day, I think they must be put to use. So we have come out with a commercial plan, which is not, which is partly subsidized, in the sense that we give the box for free. And we also provide bandwidth at a reasonable cost. And today we have reached, in the last 4 or 5 months, we have reached about 2.5 lakh households. They are wired up with fiber connections. And we couldn't believe that that the per household consumption has reached nearly about 160 GB per month, which is amazing. I think. So therefore, there is a huge pent-up demand out there, and I'm sure that the way we are going to expand now will actually satisfy that requirement for information and the connectivity to the world. I think. So I believe that BharatNet has a great opportunity to actually be a complement to the mobile networks. While 5G gets rolled out, the mobility aspect of connectivity will get addressed. But I guess there is also a parallel requirement for connectivity at the households, where penetration may be inadequate.
Yeah.
So people have requirement for online education, for businesses within the households, and perhaps even doing online businesses, I mean, e-commerce and so on and so forth. So they will require a complement between the mobile and the fiber, and we believe that this is a great opportunity that we have before us.
You know, you talked about the opportunity, and you also talked about how many households you've managed to connect so far. But you also alluded there to monetization. But there was a lot of chatter about the fact that monetization had actually been derailed, that there wasn't that much public-private, there wasn't that much private interest in wanting to partner with the public. So are you saying that that's not the case? Is there private sector interest?
No, it's a very good question. See, incidentally, fixed line networks, optic fiber networks are very expensive to maintain, especially because we have a huge construction work going across the country. We have a huge number of programs.
India is forever under construction.
Yes. So therefore, cuts, I mean, every fiber network suffers nearly about 4 cuts per 1,000 kilometers per month. So the cost of maintaining an fiber optic network is very onerous. So therefore, and coupled with that, we have a low, I mean, what do you say, expected revenue base in the rural areas. So it's a very hard market, unlike the urban areas. So therefore, the private sector perception of this particular value of this particular network is a little low. I mean, I think we can well understand that. Therefore, I think we have decided to go forward with the public sector model, wherein BSNL will maintain it, run it, and then monetize the last mile. So we are not monetizing the whole network, but the last mile, where from the village point, I think they will take it to the households and maintain it and service the customer. And that's worked well, I think.
I'll come to BSNL and the revival package that the government announced for BSNL in a second, but let me get Mr. Subramaniam into the conversation as well. Mr. Subramaniam, you know, as part of the India at 75 vision, Niti Aayog had put together a strategy document, a strategy paper on the use of digital technologies, the use of digital innovation. As things currently stand, beyond Ayushman Bharat, beyond health and financial inclusion, where do you believe the next bed of innovation will lie, especially in the context of the development state that the Niti Aayog is pushing for?
Before I answer that, I'd like to actually take you back. What's the importance of digital public infrastructure? I think that's very, very important to understand. You see, I think the digital space grew in an area of benign neglect. Governments around the world allowed them to grow because I think that was required very early on. One didn't understand how these digital technologies would grow and how they would pan out in the long run. But over now, the last 20 years, people have actually realized that there are a lot of externalities that come out of this. There are network externalities, and actually a few firms can actually dominate the entire digital space. And that's where I think the digital public infrastructure concept becomes very, very important. I mean, it's very related to what we call technology commons. And commons are a public good. So there is a fundamental question. Is the digital architecture through which the world today, and certainly the world of the future, is going to be run by a few monopolies or oligopolies, or is it going to be left common on which a lot of innovation, technology, entrepreneurship can drive? And I think that's where India is a leader in 3 areas, and in the thought itself, in content, and most importantly in rollout. I mean, we have been rolling out it in billions. And therefore, you have so many examples of digital public infrastructure in India. And you've got the UPI, you've got Aadhaar, you've got the account aggregator stack, you've got CoWIN, you've got the agri stack coming up, you've got the logistics stack which is coming up, there's a labor stack in the pipeline. So Niti plays an interesting role. I mean, the role of Niti is, as a think tank of the government, its job is to ideate, incubate, and then transfer, the IIT of the government. So as the IIT of the government, I think it's done it successfully. It pushed digital payments. I think it's in the process of pushing a couple of other things. I mentioned agri, I've talked about labor, I've talked about logistics. I mean, the portal was conceived here, but then now you have a department taking it forward. So I see a bright future, and I see this space being an area Indian technology and much more Indian entrepreneurship in India and globally.
You know, that's a nice line that you've given us. Niti Aayog is the IIT for India, and I can see many will probably go with that headline tomorrow. It's a quotable quote there, Mr. Subramaniam. But, you know, I'll come back to you on the importance of the digital goods aspect that you spoke of and what we can now expect in the next phase of growth. But let me get to Dilip Aspi of NPCI. And before I get to you, Dilip, let me do a quick poll here of the audience. How many people here use UPI? Literally everybody in this room. Dilip, that should bring a big smile to your face.
Who didn't raise the hand, actually?
Who doesn't use UPI?
Yeah.
There's one solitary gentleman in the room, and okay, three people in this room who don't use UPI. So, well, the house is on your side, Dilip. But let me start by talking to you about something that has captured the headlines overnight, and I know you've spent a large part of your day clarifying that. What is the reason behind the charges that you've brought in? I know you've clarified that these charges don't impact you and me, i.e. the consumer. It is at the merchant's end that the charge applies. But explain to me the reason behind this, and I'll also tell you the fear in the mind of the customer, that this is only the start, that this is the start of charges being imposed on consumers for using UPI. The other fear is, look, consumer will have to pay one way or the other. The merchant will, in a way, get the consumer to pay. So I want you to clarify on the rationale behind these charges and whether this could lead to more such kind of charges.
So first of all, Shireen, there are two entities which are actually taking part in the merchant payments. One is the customer and second is the merchant. And obviously there is a P2M, which is person to merchant and person to person transactions in UPI or any other payment system. So one thing is very clear, that customer never pays for any payment transaction, right? Whether it's a peer-to-peer or peer-to-merchant. Always merchant as a user of the payment system pays the nominal reasonable charges for the payment system. So that's the first principle. The second point is the UPI for the bank account, using the bank account is already free with the government notification. And again, if there is a review, if there is a change, again, the government will have to decide on the next course on that. The notification which we issued was pertaining to the prepaid wallets, right? Because with the RBI guideline, the wallets are now interoperable. And while they were already operating on the cards, they were not permitted in UPI. So to permit them in UPI, the interchange was permitted. So that's, I think, a nutshell clarified. Again, there as well, only the merchant pays, the consumer doesn't pay anything.
You've made that amply clear, not just here on the Rising India stage, but even in the NPCI press release that came out this morning, clarifying that the consumer doesn't need to pay. But the larger question is, Dilip, when we're talking about moving to 1 billion transactions, which is what the aspiration is for you. You're anticipating a 10x growth from here by 2030. Someone's got to pay. Who is going to invest? Where do you get the money from?
So again, it's a great question. And, today as we stand, you rightly said, the near-term goal, which is next 2 years to 3 years, we are looking at 1 billion transactions. We are at 30 crore on a daily basis. The peak transaction.
That does deserve a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. 30 crore transactions.
And it's all made in India, operated by India for the citizens. I think it's a great beginning, I must say that. It's not the end. We still have to grow 10x. So I think when we look at 1 billion a day or 10x growth, which is the 3 billion per day, which is the true potential of India, you're right. I think we need money. We need investments both on the customer side, because there are 600 million eligible customers who can actually come inside the digital payments who are outside today. There are another 100 million merchants who are outside the digital payments who can come inside. So I think it is going to need money. As on date, the government is kind of giving the digital payment incentive to the ecosystem, and there is a dialogue with the ecosystem and the government, the stakeholders, that how do we grow UPI to 10x now, and how do we ensure that the awareness, education, the whole consumer and merchant onboarding for the large number takes place. Even if we don't do anything this year, it will happen in next 10 to 15 years' time. Now the question is, can we do this by 2030? I think that's the question which we are looking at, and I think it's an issue which is under discussion. So let's see how it progresses. As of now, the government is paying the incentives, and ecosystem is still trying to look at a very positive, with a very positive outlook that we need more investments, banks, fintechs, everybody.
That is the reality. We need more investments. If the consumer is not going to pay, who does, Mr. Subramaniam?
I'd like to add a point, I think everybody remembers, flying in India was supposed to be a rich man's fancy. And you remember Captain Gopinath came with Deccan Aviation, and then he said, we'll sell tickets for 1 rupee. It changed people's mindsets. Today, everybody thinks of flying as an alternative to railways, irrespective of what their income levels are. I think the same thing with UPI. In the initial years, you need to promote, you need to see that it becomes a habit. And then once the ecosystem is large enough not just domestically, but that you're able to compete globally, because there are alternative payment systems, you should be able to be strong enough to take them on. At that point, one can think of other ways. But in the initial years, all technologies need to be sustained with some degree of support.
Yes, that support, as you put it, is understood. But you talked about the global aspiration. Let me get each one of you to comment on that. And Dilip, I'll start by asking you. The plans to globalize UPI, an initial beginning has been made with the pact that's been struck with Singapore and India. I know that you believe that this could be the model, this could be the template for what we could do with other countries. What's the appetite? You are going to be speaking, Dilip is on his way to the G20 Sherpa meeting in Kumarakom. He's going to be speaking there. This is one of the priorities that the Indian government has set out as part of the G20 presidency. I mean, how quickly do you believe UPI can truly globalize?
So, Shireen, the Prime Minister's vision and again the government, RBI, all are working towards the way India is self-sufficient on the payments for the domestically. I think next 10 to 20 years' time, a long vision is to be self-sufficient on the cross-border pipes as well. And it's a time-consuming process, but the beginning has been made with the Singapore-India corridor. I think in 30 seconds, one country's bank account can be debited and another country's bank account can be credited with all forex conversions, the compliances, the checks, AML, all CFT. I think the Singapore model has given that confidence to the world, in my assessment, that in 30 seconds, two bank accounts in two different countries can transact. I think this is just a beginning, and the RBI, the MEA, the government is also helping us to reach out to the other central banks and their agencies to create this cross-border pipes. It's a long journey, but I think everybody's committed to make this happen. We'll have to look at an investment approach, right? Because the transaction will take longer time to pick up to the level what you're looking at. But I think the outlook is outstanding. $100 billion remittance we get on a yearly basis. Plus we have a huge travel now outbound from India. So I think it's a great story. We'll have to keep doing this.
So in the next 5 years, what would you believe we could, where could we be as far as globalization is concerned?
So I think, it may not be a very wrong to say that, at least a few countries utilizing the India's payment stack, right? Prime Minister said that India's public good can be the public good of the world. Similarly, having the cross-border pipes with at least 15 top countries out of 30 to have the self-sufficient cross-border pipes to process remittances and payments. Well, that's a vision we are looking at.
Well, it's not going to be an easy road, as you know.
Absolutely.
But that is the vision, and it's an aspirational vision. Is that, Mr. Rajaraman? Speaking of aspirational visions and targets, the 5G rollout. I was speaking with the global CEO of Ericsson, and he said that what India has been able to do as far as the 5G rollout is concerned so far is probably the fastest 5G rollout in the world. And by the end of 2023 or by March of 2024, between both Jio and Bharti, we should see nationwide coverage as far as 5G is concerned. You've already been tasked with rolling out 6G. I mean, when are we realistically talking about that?
It's a good question, because if you look at our story, starting from 2G, I think the country was essentially a consumer of technology, I think, for 2G, 3G, and a best part of 4G. So that was very unfortunate. I think though we had the capabilities, we look at the history. We had an organization called CDOT. We have an organization. CDOT's contribution to the construction of building digital exchanges in those days, in the 90s, is phenomenal. I think the way it was able to replace international options was phenomenal. But somewhere in between, I think they lost the opportunity to innovate. So not only CDOT, but the entire ecosystem. But the last several years, I think I would say 7-8 years, I think the confidence has returned to the local domestic industry. Because essentially, it is not about building technology. Building technology has to come along with market access. If we don't promote our own products, who else will? So therefore, I think that is the confidence that the industry has got today. So therefore, I would say the last several years, I think, let me also say that while we are talking about mobile technologies, India is a world leader in optical communication technology. Some of our companies are exporting to nearly about 40 countries. There are fiber networks, the optical communication networks, and so on and so forth, routers, and so on and so forth. So it is in mobile, I think, probably somewhere we lost in between. So the last several years, I think now we have built a 4G core, put it to the strictest standards of tests, and now we are there, I think. So, and CDOT has also rolled out a 5G NSA core. And by end of this year, they are going to roll out a 5G SA core. And it's not only about C-Dot. I mean, I think we have companies like TCS, I mean, Jio, all of them have made contributions. They are all now enthused enough to say that, okay, we are also going to join the bandwagon. And let me say that the 5G rollout itself, Jio stack also contains their own, equipment. So this is something which we are very proud of, incredibly proud of, and we need to support it. So how do we support it? That's the question. That's a fundamental question. So one is providing market access. The other is we need to fund the R&D. If you look at the world majors, they all have spent tens of billions of dollars every year in research. So our research by far has been very, very low. So for the first time, I think we have now a formal system. We have a telecom technology development fund. We are funding startups. So I think this needs to grow to scale. I mean, I think it's not as if government has not been funding, but focused funding on a particular technology where we've been largely consumers of technology is the focus. So I think a combination of market access and investment in R&D will get you there. I mean, I think. And we are very confident because now we have stacks which can compete with the best in the world. And I think maybe the end of this year, we will see substantial global traction as well.
You know, I think, and that is that's been a legacy issue, the lack of investment in R&D, public as well as private, and that has been something that we need to correct. But, you know, since we're talking about 5G, I'm going to do another quick poll here of our guests. How many people have already switched to 5G? Well, that's not bad. That's about 30% of the room has perhaps moved over to 5G. But, you know, Mr. Subramaniam, since we're talking about what is going to be the next layer of innovation, especially in the context of the priorities of a development state, accountability, efficiency, transparency, where do you believe we currently stand on that front? And how important do you think it is going to be in this era for India to really have a robust law, data protection and data privacy law, which we don't currently?
I think on the data protection law, you've seen the statements of the minister. I think the act is in the final stages. I think probably in the monsoon session, you'll have the act coming up. They've had public consultations. I think it's a forward-looking act, and I think the concerns of industry as well as stakeholders have been taken on board. So I think that's something that's going to be coming up. I think the biggest thing they're going to keep in mind that India is a great provider of digital technologies and software around the world, and so we shouldn't harm that either. So I think as one reads it and one is privy to some of the discussions that are going on, we will have a forward-leaning data protection law, which will also ensure that our existing businesses which are there in the country, and India is a major services producer, both domestically and internationally, that without that being heard, adequate data protection is there for the individual. Coming back to the other question, where do you see the development trajectory going, etc.? I will limit myself again to digital public infrastructure. I think this is one area where India is actually playing the role of a disruptor globally. And I think that's very important. We could have flown along with the tide and then done what everybody else is doing. I think it's very interesting that India is actually poking its nose, creating waves, breaking up existing patterns, creating new architectures, which is allowing our own firms to piggyback on that public architecture and come up with new solutions, new technologies, new applications.
Give me examples of this poking nose disruption that you speak of.
It's very clear. I mean, I will begin one by one. Look at Aadhaar, the identity. I mean, the day is not far away when we're going to sell Aadhaar as an identity globally. I mean, it is quite possible to do that. We already have, I think, about 7 to 8 crore people outside India who use digital identities using our work. So I think this is going to, and instead of having 200 passwords, I mean, this could be a digital identity. Estonia is probably selling digital identity globally, but they're in a couple of million. Look at our size and scale, and we have proved that it works. Look at what UPI is doing. I mean, I'm actually a bit more ambitious than NSPCL in the sense that when I'm not going to look at it as something which is just cross-border, 30 countries or 15 countries. I foresee this as a major challenge to what existing financial transaction systems globally are. This is going to be a threat to SWIFT. This is going to be a threat to other payment systems around the world. I mean, it's not impossible that 15, 20 years down the road, the UPI model becomes the basic payment model around the world within countries for their own internal financial transactions. And where India benefits from that is being the thought leader in this. It's our firms which will have the products, which will then be universally applicable. One of the complaints against the Indian software sector is that we provide, white labor, we are basically doing back office work, and we don't develop products. The advantage of this, and the third one, the account aggregator framework, which RBI has developed. In a way, that is piggybacking on UPI and the digital payment system, where you're going to have fintech firms which are going to lend to people, not on assets, but on cash flows. I mean, that's a fundamental shift. I mean, a thelawala on a road doesn't have assets, but he has cash flows, and you can actually lend to people on cash flows. Once you've established that principle, think of how it will explode globally. And so whatever you see, be in Bangalore, Bombay, outside Delhi, these new startups, the unicorns that are coming up, they're not unicorns just for nothing, but they are coming up with business models which are riding on our public architecture, which tomorrow I foresee as at least half or more than half of them being global standards. And building on what NSPC UPI is doing, what India should be doing is, after having established the proof of concept on scale in India, we need to set global standards. And the day that happens, you will see that Indian standards means more Indian created stuff, be it products or technologies spreading around the world. I think that's the game of the future. Are we going to get into standard making? And I think we are on the way, and that's where the G20 will help.
Well, Dilip Asbe, are you ready for this challenge that Mr. Subramaniam has thrown your way? Replace SWIFT in the next 20 years?
No, okay. Look, I think what we are looking at, more innovation, as you and Sir was talking about. I think we still have huge amount of innovation to be made by our companies. While the public platform is run, the private players has to innovate, right? I'm saying, so whether you look at offline payments, whether you look at recurring, there is still a huge growth, right? RBI has recently launched a digital currency again. So I think today we are standing at 13% cash to GDP ratio, right? If we want to call ourselves a developed countries in next 20 years' time, I think we should be in a higher single digit at least, if not lower. So I believe that there is a lot more to be done, in my assessment.
You've said that it is a journey, and it's a long distance covered, but a long distance to go as well. But Mr. Rajaraman, let's address the issue, since we're talking about globalization and we're talking about India leading innovation. Through the PLI scheme, the government has tried to bring in manufacturing in India, including in the telecom sector. There's also part of that is to try and create domestic champions. But are we creating powerful domestic brands? Manufacturing, contract manufacturing for Apple or Foxconn, etc., is one thing. But to truly be a domestic champion, are we creating brands that can go global?
So this is also a very interesting question. So because essentially one intervention doesn't answer this question. So if you want to build domestic champions, number one, I think we must focus on India designs. Designing a product is very, very important. So while the government launched a PLI in 2021, I think we had a further round of discussion with the industry, and it struck us that probably we should be supporting Indian designed products. So therefore we came out with a design-linked PLI scheme, where Indian patents-based products would be given higher incentives. So I think that is the first step that we have done. Second thing, we have set up a telecom development fund, technology development fund, because essentially designs require a lot of investment in R&D. So that also is something which needs to be done. So therefore, at the end of the day, unless we support products which are based on local designs, which means that Indian companies must invest in R&D, I think then India's presence in the global space would be rather restricted. So therefore, our exercise has been to answer this question in different ways, Minathing. And third, of course, is market access, about which I've already talked, Minathing.
Mr. Subramaniam, let's address this issue, because I think come February, which is the time that the union budget is presented, everyone in the corporate sector says there should be more incentives given to corporate India for R&D investments. And this has been a long-standing demand. There have been many changes. In fact, there's been a rollback of the incentives that the government was providing. But if India truly has to lead when we talk about innovation, especially digital technologies, what do you believe the government can do to facilitate or spur private investment in R&D?
I was just recently reading a paper, and they identified 44 critical technologies which are critical both for security as well as for industry, as well for leadership. And of course, the big worry there was China is dominant in about 35 of them. They're number one, not United States. But the more interesting thing is that in about 30 of them, India is in the top 5. So, I mean, let's not be sad about what Indian R&D is doing. There is a lot of good R&D going on in India. But the fact of the matter is, are we getting into products and are we getting into brands? And I think the point you said there was earlier. I'll combine the two and answer. Number one, I think there is a development life cycle even in industry. You first need to get into manufacturing. I mean, a lot of manufacturing has got hollowed out in India. I mean, in his own sector, Indian telecom industries, telephone industries was the first public sector. And then we started importing a lot of stuff. So I think we're getting back onto the rails. So let's get into mass manufacturing first. That's what China did. But just wait, in 4 or 5 years, from mass manufacturing, China has now brands. And there are brands everywhere. So I foresee the large-scale production that is there in PLIs gradually transforming into brands, because at some point the company who's actually doing manufacturing for a third party is going to think, why can't I make my own brand? So I think that's what the evolution is. We never supported scale. Let the scale come in. Once the scale comes in, I mean, human innovation will take them to brands. Coming back to R&D, I think issue is not about tax benefits or whatever. I think the primordial urge of industries to survive and grow requires them to invest in R&D. And they are doing it. I mean, look at our automobile sector. And I'm going back to my past position wherever I was. You talk to the two-wheeler industry in India. The two-wheeler industry in India is global, the world-beating, and they're the best. They're not terrified about any two-wheeler from some other country. Go to EVs. In two-wheeler EVs, today India is top gun. Nobody can beat India in two-wheeler EVs in the kind of technology. And it's not that you're making the two-wheeler. It's the inner components, the parts, the touch screens, all of them are now designed in India. There's nobody else who can be there. I think that's where, be it the FAME program, be it the PLIs, as we push more into these areas, I'm quite sure R&D is as important as manufacturing. It will happen in consonance. And you've got departments which are individually supporting R&D.
Mr. Rajaraman, since we are talking about manufacturing, let me very quickly get an update from you on the semiconductor plans. Again, a very aspirational, ambitious plan that we put on the table in terms of manufacturing semiconductors here in India. What's the update, sir? We've all been waiting for one.
So this is with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology.
I know, but I know that the government doesn't work in silos anymore.
Yes,
At least that's what we keep hearing.
Yes, but then I think the process of calling for proposals are in the final stage of examination. So we expect some decisions probably in a month or two. So at the end of the day, it is a process. So it is just not about announcing a set of initiatives. A lot of initiatives are already happening. Like for instance, we in India have a very strong fabless design capability in Bangalore and many other parts of the country. I think, in fact, most of the multinational companies have their back-end fabless chip design facilities in India. So the R&D headcount is huge. I think. So the capabilities already exist in India, except we need to move to the next stage of fabrication. In fact, that is being overcome by the industry by actually sending it out to other countries. So I wouldn't say it's a disability, but if you go to large-scale manufacturing, well, it is in a sense. So I think maybe in a couple of years from now, I think once this initiative takes off, so there are 2-3 parts to it. One, of course, is to set up the fab facility, for which I think probably the decisions are in a very advanced stage. The other thing is to create the ecosystem that will support it. That's very, very important, because you need the skill sets and you need the supply chain, because both are very critical to the semiconductor industry. A supply chain which is very, very specialized, I think rare gases and specialty chemicals and so on and so forth. So that is something which the government is actually working with, and I think there are a number of producers already in India who are now being kind of coordinated into producing to scale and to the quality that the semiconductor industry requires. And also, the government is also actively working with the industry in actually building the skill sets that are required for manufacturing. So therefore, that requires people with lithography skills, the EDA tools, etc., etc. So I think a number of institutions and number of collaborations are on the job, including design of advanced chipsets, etc. And as far as our department is concerned, we've also launched a submission to look at about 3-4 telecom chipsets, which are crucial to telecom manufacturing, and we'll also be working on them, I think.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Dilip Asbe, you're headed to the G20 Sherpa meeting in Kumarakom. You are going to be presenting your story, the UPI story, the NPCI story there tomorrow morning. why don't you give us a sneak peek on what the story is going to be that you tell the G20 here with us here in the audience?
So Shirin, I think we just have been talking about how the UPI can help any other country. We have spent about 12, 13 years now building up the digital payment story of India. So why the country has to spend all the time, all the efforts, right? So that's a pitch back to the other countries. Obviously, it's their choice to use or not to use, but we are kind of looking at a knowledge support. We are looking at a software support under the regulator-to-regulator arrangement. We are also giving the source code to the central banks so that they are self-sufficient and they are not dependent on India for that matter. So these are the kind of things. And obviously, how do we make the cross-border efficient? Because one of the G20 mandates has been improve the access, transparency, the cost, and it has to be real time, right? So these are the 4 principles of G20 laid down for the cross-border remittances. So again, how do we get more traffic on adhering to these 4 principles? So a lot of work, I think, a lot of discussions are happening, and we believe that hopefully the countries are looking at India as an aspirational story which they can use as their partner to build up their domestic payments.
Okay, well, that was a very quick sneak peek on what Dilip is going to be presenting to the G20 Sherpas in Kumarakom tomorrow. I know you have a flight to catch, Dilip. So thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to Dilip Asbe, the CEO of NPCI. We wish you the very best of luck as you make your pitch to the G20. Gentlemen, let me come back to the two of you. Mr. Subramanian, let's address the issue of what we can expect next. The Niti Aayog, in fact, has put out a paper saying that digital banks could be the future, that India has a facilitating environment in light of Aadhaar, in light of everything else that we've been able to do with UPI, etc., that digital banks may not necessarily be far away in the future.
You see, digital banks is an old idea. I mean, it's at least 20 years old. There are countries which have floated digital banks, but they've just not taken off for a variety of reasons. What you have had is actually computerization of brick and mortar banks, and then your interface with branches has reduced, but banks have not vanished. But now that you see the building blocks are already there, you've got a payment system, you've got an identity system, you've got your presence-less, paperless, cashless, all that happening. Digital banks is just one step away. It's just a question of RBI as a regulator becoming comfortable with the concept. And it's not far away that RBI will also have to accept reality, that this is the way forward. And India is actually best positioned to do that. And once you have digital banks, and of course, there'll be a different regulatory setup for that. It's not a payment system because banking system affects the entire economy. You need some prudential norms to manage that. But once the RBI sets up and recognizes the need for this, understands that technological progress is inevitable. So, and then you recognize that, you set up regulatory system. I think India can be a leader in digital banks. I mean, Niti's paper is a forward-looking paper. I think that's the job of Niti, to wake people up and shake people up and say that, look, if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. And why don't we do it first? And if we do it first, we again become global leaders in that area.
Yes, this was a paper presented by the Niti Aayog in 2022 on how India can take the leap as far as digital banks are concerned. But Mr. Rajaraman, Mr. Subramaniam said Niti is the IIT of the government, but let me ask you about the work that you're doing with the real IITs, which is IIT Madras on the 5G test bed. While everyone's talking here about 5G and eventually moving to 6G, where India wants to be the leader as far as the 6G rollout is concerned, but use cases of 5G that are relevant and contextual for India and our aspiration for growth, what do we have as of today?
So let me first of all answer the first question on this test bed, I think. So since I think I must place on record some of the finest engineers in India, I think many of them who stayed back in India and working hard silently. I think I would like to recognize them. Like, for instance, the engineers, the 1,500 engineers we have in CDOT. Phenomenal work they have done in developing the 4G core and the 5G core. Similarly, the IITs you mentioned. There are many professors out here who are doing high-end research in 5G advanced, and some of them have got 6G-related patents as well, I think. So these are outstanding people who are also, I think, taking the tough task of actually filing a patent. Filing a patent can be incredibly difficult. Let me tell you that. I think it can be incredibly difficult because getting a global patent is even more difficult. So this is something which actually inspires a lot of us, I think, because we believe that these researchers out in public research institutions, in IITs and in industry are the ones who are driving the nation by creating new products and employment.
They do deserve a round of applause.
Yes,
the silent but real heroes who are working across different institutions on new technologies like 5G, etc. They do deserve a big round of applause. Sorry, you were going.
Yeah. So there is also another category of people who I believe are great heroes. Like, for instance, the BharatNet, the question that you asked, there are, in the last 5-6 months, we have enrolled about 5,000 BharatNet Udyamis, who are youngsters out in the village, who have taken the trouble of drawing the fiber and taking it to the houses, maintaining, answering the customer calls, and making the digital India happen. So these guys, I think they are the ones who are probably going to take digital to the villages. So these guys are amazing. In fact, I think when we send teams out to the rural heartland, incredible stories emerge. Like, for instance, I remember a particular story about an old man who is living in a village in Haryana, whose son was there on a short visit. After seeing the fiber and the digital connectivity in the village, he promised his father that I will bring your grandchildren back to the village now from the US. So I think they are going to host the grandchildren for the first time after several years because they have now hope that they can stay connected, I think. So these are the stories that you get from the villages. So coming back to your question on 5G use cases, I guess these are early days. I think the technology is getting rolled out across the country. The feel of the technology is also something which enterprises need to understand, the costs, the benefits, etc. So at this point of time, in the last 8-9 months, we have actually launched an interministerial committee, which is working with all the ministries, the central public sector undertakings, and the private sector to look at sector-specific use cases. The use cases are in education, in smart agriculture, in mining, in enterprise, within the shop floors and the factories, to look at workstation monitoring. So there are incredibly different use cases, including the social sector. Like, for instance, there is a use case where AI with, say, high-resolution cameras wired to the smart city control room can actually enable to throw up alerts about chain snatching or some attack in the street or some crime which is happening in the street, etc. So those are the kinds of things that can happen, that can enable citizen safety, citizen convenience and comfort when he travels late in the night. So incredibly different, diverse use cases are emerging, and we are supporting them. Every ministry is now funding them, for instance, funding these use cases, because pilots have to be run to ensure that there is sufficient confidence to invest in replication across the country. So I think this is all happening now. I think you will see a large number of use cases getting rolled out by the end of this year and early next year.
Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing what those use cases are that you say will be rolled out by the end of the year. Mr. Subramanian, we are talking about AI, ML, emerging technologies, advanced technologies. This takes me back to a conversation I had many years ago with Sam Pitroda, where he said that while India is talking about technology and adoption of technology, we would have truly arrived when government offices will replace the Nadewali files altogether. How far are we from that?
Okay, I must mention this. So when I left my previous office and I took a couple of months off, I wanted to tie some paper and take it back. And I couldn't get a file pad in my office to tie it. So actually the NADA has disappeared. We are actually in government only on e-office. We are on e-file, everything. I mean, I don't spend more than 20 minutes clearing files in a day. It gives me so much more time to think. I mean, used to have this peon or the class 4 employee whose job was basically to carry files from desk to desk. In most government offices, they have vanished. And I think that's a big credit to the government. This is something that has happened very rapidly in the last 5-6 years. It's a work in progress. We'll evolve to next stage. But the fact is today, files are moving completely electronically, and not just within ministries, but across barriers, across ministries. So I think we don't get applications for leave or whatever. So everybody is online, everybody is doing stuff. So I think the government has evolved. We have a lot more to do. We are not yet into data analytics in a big way. Government throws up a lot of data. So using data for decision making, these are frontier areas. But the basic rubric of actually working online is right across. In fact, trying to get something physical now is a big problem.
So we have come a long way. I want to ask both of you, Mr. Rajaraman, I'll start by asking you, what are the apps that you spend most of your time on?
I think it's e-office, as you said, e-office, and then maybe a little bit of WhatsApp and DigiLocker and those kind of stuff. You know, there are UPI, for instance. I think so. These are the and we have a video conferencing app. I think called Samvad and C.Meet. These are also incredibly useful applications. I think.
Mr. Subramaniam, what are you on?
Pretty similar stuff, and I'm not on streaming services, so I don't have Amazon Prime or whatever. But I must tell you one story, and that's very interesting. I think Asbeh has left, but you would find it interesting. A couple of months ago, I was on the beach in Vizag on a morning walk, and I wanted to buy dal muri early in the morning. So I bought, and I asked the lady, and then she's probably semi-literate, maybe class 2-3 pass. And she said, "Kitna?" And she said, 10 rupees. And then I didn't have much in I had a 100 rupee note. And I pulled it out, and she looked back at me and said, UPI nahi hai aapke paas. And you felt so ashamed, Here is a man, and here is this lady on a beach telling you, don't you have UPI? She didn't even say UPI. Telephone se nahi pay kar sakte hain kya, And, I felt very, very ashamed. I'm not carrying my phone. But, that's evolution. And I think that's the kind of barrier we have crossed. And the day we ride on this 5G and the speed at which it is being rolled out, you will see public switching to it so fast. And the use cases will develop not just inside government, but 10x outside government.
Yes, that is the hope and that is the expectation that we will see a lot being built on the 5G networks that are currently being rolled out. Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Rising India Summit, for giving us a sense of what the government's priorities are when it comes to digital India. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Mr. Subramaniam as well as Mr. Rajaraman. Thank you very much for your time.
Big round of applause. Gentlemen, may I just request 2 minutes to, can you please stay back on stage? I just request Shireen to present them mementos at Rising India, please. Thank you. Big round of applause for them, ladies and gentlemen. So we talk about UPIs. There was a time where they said कि पटुआ लेना मत भूलिए. आज ऐसा हो गया कि फोन है ना चल जाएगा. So that's the change that's happened. So from digital transformation or digital expressways and highways or information highways, let's now talk about the hard brick and mortar highways and the expressways, the way India is being connected. Our next session is about one of the most visible transformations that are sweeping India. Sample this. Delhi to Dehradun, 2 hours. Delhi to Haridwar, 2 hours. Delhi to Jaipur, 2 hours. Delhi to Chandigarh, 2.5 hours. Delhi to Amritsar, 4 hours. Delhi to Srinagar, 8 hours. Bengaluru to Chennai, 2 hours. Road journeys are becoming a breeze. And I must say, I have done this. Lucknow to Noida, 5.5 hours. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. You know who we are welcoming next. My pleasure to welcome Shri Nitin Gadkari, Union Minister for Road Transport and Highways, Government of India, to talk about the building blocks of Rising India, and he'll be in conversation with News 18's Kishore Ajwani. Big round of applause for Gadkari ji, please.
तो पहले तो मैं ऑडियंस को ये बता दूं, आपने एक वादा पूरा किया. आप पिछली बार जब आए थे आपने कहा था अगली बार हाइड्रोजन कार में आऊंगा, और आज आप हाइड्रोजन पावर्ड कार में ही आए. हम लोग हाइड्रोजन पावर्ड बस में कब आएंगे?
अभी तो अशोक लेलैंड और टाटा ने जो उनकी ट्रक और बसेस है वो आईसी इंजन को हाइड्रोजन पे अब चला सकते हैं, ऐसा उन्होंने ऑटो एक्सपो में मॉडल्स लॉन्च किए हैं. मुझे लगता है कि अब दिन दूर नहीं है. केवल 2 इम्पॉर्टेंट बातें उसमें हैं कि हाइड्रोजन 3 प्रकार का है. एक हाइड्रोजन जो पेट्रोलियम से होता है वो ब्राउन हाइड्रोजन, जो कोल से होता है वो ब्लैक हाइड्रोजन, और जो पानी से और ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट से होता है वो ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन। अभी मुझे बताते हुए खुशी हो रही कि दिल्ली में 3 बड़े बड़े माउंटेन्स हैं। मैंने कहा कि ये पर्यटन स्थल बन गए। ये कचरे के हैं, गाजीपुर और 2 जगह पर। तो अभी हमने 20 लाख टन कचरा, ये जो दिल्ली का यूरिया 2 जो है रिंग रोड, ये जो सोनीपत के आते हुए पेरिफेरल रोड के बाद एयरपोर्ट जाने के लिए 2 से 2.5 घंटे लगते थे, अब 20 मिनट में लोग जाएंगे डायरेक्ट। वो रोड पूरा बना है, उसमें हमने 20 लाख टन कचरा यूज़ किया है। अब इसी कचरे को सैग्रीगेट करके इसमें प्लास्टिक, मेटल और ग्लास को अलग करके जो ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट होगी वो बायोडाइजेस्टर में डाल के उससे मीथेन बनाकर मीथेन से हाइड्रोजन बनेगा। एक मार्ग ये है जो एग्री राइस स्ट्रॉ बगास उससे होगा। और दूसरा सोर्स जो है, ये जो गंदा पानी है, कोई भी पानी है पर हम लोग वेस्ट वाटर यूज़ करें और उसमें इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र, हम इस समय वर्ल्ड में इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र के नंबर 1 मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब है। हम अमेरिका को एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं। तो इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र से हम लोग पानी से ऑक्सीजन और हाइड्रोजन अलग करेंगे। फिर जो जनरेटर लगेगा 500 बार तक या 700 बार तक कंप्रेस करने के लिए, वो हम लोग 100% बायो इथेनॉल पर लेंगे, क्योंकि उसमें डीजल खर्चा करने से बढ़ेगा तो कॉस्ट बढ़ेगी। तो वो ये पानी से भी हाइड्रोजन होगा। प्रॉब्लम एक है कि 1 किलो हाइड्रोजन के लिए 50 यूनिट पावर लगेगी, तो उसकी कीमत जाएगी कम से कम $3 $4। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इसकी कीमत $1 आनी चाहिए। तो अभी बंगलोर में हमारे इंडियन साइंस रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट है, उनको मैं गया था वहाँ, उन्होंने विदाउट पावर ये बायोमास, बायो वेस्ट से हाइड्रोजन बनाया है। तो वो $1 आएगा, तो 80 रुपये में हम लोग 450 किलोमीटर चल पाएंगे। तो लोगों में बहुत सस्ता होगा, ट्रक, बसेस, कार, स्कूटर। और उसके बाद सबसे बड़ी बात है ना, हवाई जहाज़, बाद में हमारी केमिकल फैक्ट्री, स्टील फैक्ट्री, सब जगह पर हाइड्रोजन हम लोग यूज़ करेंगे। और मैं आपको बताता हूँ, जो हाइड्रोजन मिशन हमारे सरकार ने तय किया है, हम ऊर्जा को आयात करने वाले नहीं, हम ऊर्जा को निर्यात करने वाला देश बनेंगे। ये हमारा प्रयास है।
आपने हवाई जहाज़ की बात की, लोग कह रहे हैं कि आप तो हवाई जहाज़ों का धंधा ठप कर रहे हैं। जो एक्सप्रेसवेज बन रहे हैं, अब 2 घंटे में इधर, 4 घंटे में उधर।
देखिए, ये बात सही है कि अब इसी साल के अंदर में दिल्ली से देहरादून 2 घंटे में होगा, जयपुर भी 2 घंटे में होगा, तो चंडीगढ़, अमृतसर 4 घंटे में होगा। अब देखो, यहाँ से एयरपोर्ट जाना है 1 घंटा, एयरपोर्ट पे बैठना विमान में जाने के लिए 1 घंटा, वहाँ से जाने के लिए आधा पौन घंटा, और वहाँ से घर जाने के लिए 1 घंटा। अब कौन जाएगा दिल्ली से देहरादून? अगर रोड से डायरेक्ट हम नया रोड बना रहे 2 घंटे में जाएंगे, हरिद्वार में 2 घंटे में जाएंगे, तो कोई जाएगा नहीं। मुझे याद है, मैं 95-2000 में जब मुंबई में 8 फ्लाइट मुंबई से पुणे के बीच में चलती थी, और जब हमारा मुंबई पुणे एक्सप्रेस हाईवे बन गया, अब तो 20 साल हो गए, अब पुणे से मुंबई फ्लाइट बंद हो गई। तो अब यह नहीं, तो ये पर ये